So welcome back everybody, my name is Paul again, and I'm making another of my videos, and I have been making a series about esoteric teachings that have come down to us from thousands of years ago, and I have studied these things for a long time, since my early 20s, and they're so vast and so on, and there's a lot of other people who have also studied these subjects. So what I do is I try to recommend books and make some overview of some of the things I've learned and try to share them. Now, today I'm going to talk about something that's really fascinating. A lot of people don't really think about very much, but when it comes to studying our ancient history, the history of human beings on this earth, a lot has to do with trying to understand, well, how old are human beings on this earth, and what types of human beings what were they doing, and what kind of skills did they have, and could they build, and could they do things, and could they travel, could they navigate, and so on. And what we have to consider in that research is that right now on this earth there are people who spend their whole day with high technology, and they just work on computers all day long, and they just have incredible high-tech jobs, and that's what they know. At the same time, right now there are people in Brazil or other places of the world, and they just get up in the morning and they make a little fire or whatever, and they go down and they fish, and they put their boat in the water, and that's their life. They don't even see technology. So when we look at ancient history and the records of ancient history, we have to understand that even though we may find very primitive things in one area, we also know that there may have been other areas, and maybe even very small parts of the world, other parts of the world, where there are very advanced kind of cultures, or people certainly doing very different things than the people who were living in the jungles. Another thing we got to remember is that just because you live in a jungle doesn't mean you're not very smart. Because, for example, right now, if in modern culture somehow we had a catastrophe and we lost all electricity and so on, after 50, 60 years, people would grow up and they don't know anything about technology, and they all they know is they get away from the cities and go out and start making huts again and working with the horses and try to hunt. And after another few hundred years, there would just be legends of the previous technology. So, though people like that in the past may have survived, we know, for example, we 100% know that there have been many huge catastrophes on this earth. We've had some right in our lifetime. If a tsunami hit in 2004, I think it was, and destroyed, a lot of beaches and killed like a few 100,000 people, and they didn't have any warning, and boom, all the villages are wiped out. And we know it could have happened plenty of times in the past. So all around the world there's been evidence of people who lived in, for example, if there were people living a long time ago and they made simple structures, and one day there's a tsunami and it wiped them out, time would go by and we'd never even know who they were, or even if they were there. If the seas rose, we might never find them. So one of the things that has happened in the past is we know that there's been a lot of evidence that people did travel a lot more than we thought. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about voyages around the world. I haven't read this whole book, but it's a very interesting, fascinating book to research about different voyages, or historical voyages that literally changed the world and opened up whole different kinds of concepts and travel and trade and so on. And entire technologies were born out of learning how to find and use certain minerals. For example, a lot of people don't realize that at one time around Michigan area, the Great Lakes area, there's a Pacific area there that has incredibly pure copper, and it's very near the surface and easily mineable. And they said that it must have taken 10,000 people a thousand years to mine all that copper. So somehow that copper we found out it ended up some of it in Europe and that area of the world for a huge long period of time, when they made copper and tin, they made bronze, they made different kinds of tools and so on, and very important for a very long time. So In the old days, if you know how to travel and navigate, you could gain tremendous riches and discover new areas of land. And now today, there's still satellites out in space, and they're still trying to figure out where all the minerals are, and so on. So navigation was a very important thing, a very important science, and it involved some very technical things. If you had, however maybe you didn't have a nice telescope and so on back in those days, but there are people in the South Sea Islands and so on, around Hawaii and so on, where they were incredibly clever about how they read the wind and how they read the clouds and how they read the waves and so on, and they were able to navigate considerable distances. And after a while, you pass down information, you find out, okay, well, there's a current every summer, this current goes over there, and if you follow the current, it'll just take you to this other place. And maybe you can't get back for a while, but so I have a book here today I want to recommend called The Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. And this guy here his name is Charles Hapgood. Now, this guy was a very, very famous man. I believe he was a geologist. He did a lot of important research, and he came to some early conclusions about the fact that our crust on the Earth, it must, in some ways, be able to be shifted somehow. Perhaps we know that great movements of tectonics and plates and so on have happened. We can see it. Right now, there's even things happening now that are big, huge gouges and splits in the planet, in long cavities that develop, and earthquakes and so on. Change our culture, the geography. So naturally, if people could make a lot of wealth, and certainly if they wanted to escape someone, they could hide. So if you decide, like, you go to a country where you know that, and everybody else thinks you're going to fall off the world, so we know that North America was inhabited for a very, very long time, long before Columbus got here. And there were Native Americans who saw the early settlers in North America, and they said, well, we didn't build all these mounds in Ohio. And the people of the time, the Europeans came, and they said there are thousands and thousands of these mounds and settlements, and this incredible settlement. And they asked the natives at that time, say, well, what happened? Who are these? And we didn't build them. They said, we don't even know who built them. It was built a long, long time ago. So, getting back to the subject of navigation, in the old days, there's a lot of debate now about whether people could navigate. Well, I ran across a guy, I can't remember his name now, and he wrote a book. He's a sailor and had a captain's or a seaman's certificate and was an expert sailor. And he got very curious. I think he was a guy from Britain. And he decided to investigate and figure out how could people have known longitude and sailed across the ocean long time ago. Because if people don't understand how navigation works, now, if you look at the North Pole and you make an angle up the North Pole, you can figure out on the globe of the Earth, there's a certain place, a position that you might be above and or below the equator, especially above the equator, because that's where most people lived. And they would sight and determine where on the globe, at least on upper or lower, they were. Now, as far as where they were, west or east, that was a difficult situation because they had the only way to figure that out was because of time. They had to navigate, and until I think it was the late 1700s, or they discovered a way to make an accurate clock that could help them navigate according to stars. So they had one clock that was set, say, where they did in England, where Greenwich Mean Time was, and they had another clock set with their local time. And you can see there must be a certain distance east or west. Now, this man I was telling you about, I can't remember his name right now, and he wrote a book all about it, how there's a very simple system using a very, very simple, basically a protractor on a pole and an angle and a cross. It's called a circle and a cross. And by angling at a star, because we live on a sphere in the middle, you can take any location on the planet and you can sight in the celestial canopy where you might be to a precise location if you know what you're doing. Now we use GPS, but in the old days there apparently was a system that people used that enabled them to navigate these great distances. And if there was a great catastrophe in one area of the world, which there are today, for example, there have been all kinds of really serious problems in various parts of the world. Let's say, for example, you lived in an area where they had just had a massive flood. You say, okay, I'm out of here. I don't care where we're going, but we ain't going to be here. So they may have said, okay, look, we're going to pack up our boats and we navigate by the stars. And that's why they watch the stars. We know that ancient cultures watch the stars for thousands of years. So it's pretty obvious. Why do they watch the stars? And they are building buildings and temples aligned to the stars, because if you come to a location, you come across a temple. There were temples in, what they call them temples, but they were astronomical devices that are located in the mountains of Andes and so on, where the Incas, they said that we didn't build them. And they are constructed a certain way that basically through a mathematical geometry that is embedded in the structure itself, they'll say, okay, we are at this position, we are aligned to this place, we're aligned to this is a certain time here, and the day we build this structure, this is a mark of where it is and when it is. And it's very, very fascinating. So there were ancient maps. If you had a way to say, okay, you could supply an entire civilization with copper, and you knew where it was, and you knew how to get there, but you're not telling anybody. Maps, navigation, a science that was long ago figured out, and they used a certain system called the base 60, I guess it was, based on 360 degrees, and we still use that today. And I encourage people to investigate this now. And that brings up another thing. A man named Francis Drake. There were some very, very amazing sailors back then. I mean, imagine going off in a little boat, and you basically have the stars, and you got no radio. And you're saying goodbye. I might be back in a couple of years. And you sail across the ocean. There are people who knew what the heck they were doing, and some of these people were incredibly smart. And this was here, another one, the Templars in America. Now, this is a little later, that there are people who know how to navigate, and there's a lot of indication right now very clearly that there are people from Europe who came to this part of the world a long, long time ago, and many times, and they didn't necessarily get recorded. And there's also a possibility that there was an ancient culture here in North America for a long, long time, even before the Native Americans. And when the glaciers ended at the end of the Ice Age, apparently there was a whole lot of stuff that devastated over there, including, like I read about 130 species of big, huge mammals. So I'm going to go on here a little bit to some of the other esoteric concepts that people have presented over the years. And one of them, I'll just run these things really quickly here. The idea that our whole cosmos is basically a kind of a matrix, a living matrix, not a computer matrix, but a interrelated web of energy transfer and every energy circulation, various varieties and combinations. And we have people like this guy here, Power Physics, the web of life. The divine proportion. Now again, the ratios, there are very, very amazing ratios in nature, and even a simple child can look at some of these things and say, wow, that's beautiful, and realize that there's incredible patterns. And ancient people were just as adept and smart as we are today, and some of them built incredible structures using various very special ratios that we even use today in our art and architecture and science and math. So that was a book, the guy's name is H.E. Huntley, called The Divine Proportion. The symbiotic universe, how everything's interrelated. We go from a concept of wholeness to a feeling of how, if we look at it mentally and look into how we are really in a web of life, and we are an integrated part of it, and the consciousness, if we step back in our quiet moments and realize there's an independence in our own awareness that is separate from, it's the observer even of all the thoughts, all the concepts, all the geometry, the mental images, the proportions that are built into everything around us. When we open ourselves up to some of this, like the holographic universe, again, another book that is basically talking about the same thing. We are embedded in a whole rhythm of life, of energy, movement, and that energy is a consciousness because we're conscious, and we can dance with this whole web of life and the rhythm. And this is new books about an old subject, mathematics and art, the various kinds of perceptions, and this is nothing new. This is a relatively new book, but you know, if you look at ancient architecture from a long, long time ago, they knew about proportion a very, very long time ago. A really interesting book here, quickly here, this guy, Mark Rich, Energetic Anatomy. I've talked about this, our biological electrical system that we have. We can all feel it. We know it's there. We can feel ourselves. And there are people who have developed a particular perception. They've trained themselves, or they just have a natural gift, just like some people can play the piano and memorize an incredible concert. There are some people whose perception is geared toward the subtle things and energy, and they can write interesting books. I urge people, if you're interested in energy healing and health, try to get this book, Energetic Anatomy. Now, the ancient science, again, esoteric teachings have a lot to do with cosmology and how everything, like I said, the web, the interpenetration, the interweaving, the flower of life, the interpenetrating spheres. Imagine like bubbles, just they can blend and fold in like a slinky. I mean, there's a certain ebb and flow that is built into our being that we can feel through our breath, and we can observe the symmetry and the flow of energy outwardly. If you see a flow in water, you know that there's similar flow in air. There are ways that we can just make analogies in observations, and this is a very old subject because, again, people talked about these kinds of things a long, long time ago. Here's a book called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, in terms of ebb and flow, one thing that has to be brought to mind, early in our life, we're born here, we just wake up one day, let's say we finally get out of our childhood, we look around and go, whoa, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm actually here, it's time not to play and go do some stuff. Well, we're going to end, someday we're going to be gone, you know, no doubt about it. So this is a very old kind of problem, and the Egyptians had a whole concept about, okay, well, if I'm going to pass out here one day and I'm going to leave, then let me be like a bird in a tree so that, okay, I don't care if the tree's cut down because I'm going to fly away anyway. And the whole idea of making a science of trying to not be morbid and live with the whole overwhelming like thing about death, but to be alert and to say, okay, one day I'm going to leave, so while I'm alive, I'm going to get very conscious, and I'm going to learn to distinguish between the body and my real nature as a spirit, as an awareness, and I'm going to link my awareness with that immortal thing, and then when it comes time to leave the body, then there's a science of stepping out as if like, okay, my boat has now gotten to the other shore, and I'm riding in the boat, and I'm going to get out of the boat, and I'm on my way. And this is a very deep subject because it's a profound thing that when you focus on life and death and mortality, you come to grip with some serious things. Okay, if you don't face that life and death question while you're alive, then you're going to have a big surprise later on. And the Tibetans also investigate the subject of escaping the Hindus. The whole idea of it's a very, very old subject. Now, how can you escape, and how can you become so conscious that when the time comes when you leave your body, then you are just sort of like dropping your clothes on the floor and then you're walking away. Now, quickly here, a lot about sound. The sound is a powerful energy and is a powerful force that runs through materials, and there is an analogy and metaphor between sound and every other vibration in our existence, including light. So we can observe sound and feel sound, and it comes right down the physical plane, goes through our body, goes through our water, goes through our bones, and we can tune ourselves in to all the sounds that are around us. In many days, a long time ago, before people called them primitive, but they lived out in the forest. And I'll tell you what, if you sit in the forest and listen to a beautiful stream and listen to the wind, after a while, you probably live a nice long life and a happy life, much more than if you live in a suburb. But people have, for centuries and thousands of years, been tuned to the sounds around them and within them. And this is the book about. The guy's name is Murray Schaefer. Ian Johnson, Measured Tones. It's a more modern book. I read it some time ago. I read parts of it. I don't read everything. But, all about music and the power and the ratios. The same kind of ratios that work in music, they work in architecture, they work in engineering, and they work in life forces and life creativity. So they also work in health. So if you can get in harmonious tones, it's definitely going to help you. It may not cure you, but it certainly can't hurt. And music, again, the sweet influence throughout the ages of music. Cyril Scott. I read this book long ago. Interesting. I outlined some things here, but very beautiful. And while we're on the subject of sound, I want to bring up one of the great teachers that was in the recent memory here. His name was Mahir Rishi Mahesh Yogi. This particular great teacher specialized in sound and verbal mantras, and sound has been a very, very powerful tool in enlightening and waking us up, because as we tone through our throat, we send that vibration through our whole body, and our ears open up, and vibration goes through our jaws and through our skull. So when this man had a very funny voice, but the interesting thing is, see, when a teacher might want to use a particular voice because it actually it focuses the mind. It just somehow grabs the mind and able to remember what was said. So sound as a way of organizing our thought process and focusing our mind, it can be used in a really incredible way. Music and so on, as everybody knows, really good music. And the opposite is true, because you can also get affected by very terrible sounds and obnoxious sounds, and you'll hear that. Just turn on a TV, you'll see a lot of that. Quickly here, I'll go through this book here again. Tibetan mysticism. I read parts of this book here some time ago. Really interesting. Tibetan mysticism was up in the mountains of the high Himalayas, and long ago there was a civilization up in Mongolia. If you look at a Google map, you'll see that there was a huge lake up there. There were catastrophic change a long time ago, and many of the monks went up into the mountains. And Buddhist tradition goes back 600 years before the Christian era, and these people were serious dudes back there. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monks, and they went up in the cave, and they say, "Oh, this is my cave, I ain't coming out." And it's amazing what they went through, and they left a lot of teachings for us that were also transmitted down. Esotericism and Symbolism here by Schwaller de Lubitz. Now this guy here, Schwaller de Lubitz, this guy here, very, very well, really, really smart Egyptian scholar, long before all the modern stuff. He was one of the earlier ones there, and this is another book of his called The Sacred Science. The Egyptians, it wasn't about this stupid religion and all this fantasy. These guys are serious people. You don't carve all those things and build those structures unless you're pretty darn serious. They carved that geometry and all those acoustic resonance things, and for a reason. This man did a lot of the measurements in the early days when he went there, long before it got all corrupted, and he was a really good philosopher, and he had some tremendous insight about the whole purpose of what they were doing there in Egypt. And it was a science of the highest kind, a science of awareness, and they had some stuff going on there that we just, really can't even comprehend right now. And one more book here, for those people who don't know, Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, this was an intuitive download, you might say, and if you read it, you'll say, "Oh my God, it just resonates." There's a lot more to the story of Jesus and all that was going on at that time than we get in our Bible. And intuitively, we just know that. We know, well, we got a little tiny bit of what happened in our Bible. And why is that? Because political reasons, and they, wrote scripts for the scriptures to the Roman Empire. They wanted people to think a certain way. But this book here had some very, very fascinating stories. A lot of what is in the traditional Bible is in here, but there's also some very interesting stories that, around the time of Jesus, there was a group called the Essenes, and they were mystics and meditative type of people, and they wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls that a lot of people know about. And they had a mystical aspect. The early days of Christianity was a mystical religion. It was a conscious religion. It wasn't about just like empty faith and so on. It was about awakening awareness, because not everybody wants to study that. So not everybody who met Jesus wanted to know the deeper subject that he taught. And instead they just followed around and listened to him, and he said a lot of good words and helped a lot of people. But there were other aspects of awareness that Jesus, like all the other great sages, taught people. And this is a very interesting book that you might want to read. So basically, I want to keep going on with esoteric philosophy. I really encourage people to look out. There's some modern scholars. Graham Hancock, and there's so many. I'll try to put them in the comments, but history goes back a long, long time on Earth, and there's been a lot of different kinds of human beings on this planet, as we know. We've seen bones, and I think a lot of times we underestimate the intelligence of these people. They may have had a strange body compared to us, but at the same time they were obviously very robust, and they certainly traveled, as I said, and they were able to manage tremendous feats that we now read about. So thanks again for watching, and I appreciate all the feedback. I try to share what I know, and I'm encouraged to look at other people's content. So thanks again.